What's up everyone, and welcome back to another Andrew Martin Guitar YouTube video. I'm Andrew and I'm really glad you're here. Today we're going to be talking about the Strymon Mobius modulation pedal, but specifically the destroyer setting inside the pedal. But before we begin, I want to remind you of three really quick things that you can do to help out this video and help out the channel. Number one, make sure you hit the like button. Number two, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And number three, if you're subscribing, you might as well hit the bell icon to make sure that you get a notification every time a video goes live. Now, like I said, today we're talking about the Strymon Mobius, and more specifically, 4 ways that I use the destroyer setting within the pedal to affect my own ambient micro loops and compositions. The Strymon Mobius is one of my favorite pedals of all time, and there's a reason why so many people use it. It's got 12 studio quality modulation effects ranging from your normal chorus sounds all the way to things that are more experimental like the destroyer or the quadrature mode, which just makes your signal sound absolutely crazy, but in a really good way. Now, I went a long time without using the destroyer and the Mobius because I tended to stick to effects like chorus and tremolo that are a little bit more normal. But after a deep dive into some of the settings, I fell in love with it, and I think it's a great, really unique way to add some inspiration to your playing or get a really cool lo-fi sound. But you've heard me talk about it enough. Let's just go ahead and take a dive into the 4 ways that I use the destroyer mode in my own ambient compositions. Okay, so really quickly, I want to make note that I pre-recorded a loop using the timeline to make sure that there is a constant and consistent sound that is being manipulated by the destroyer mode of the Mobius throughout the whole video. Okay, so the first way that I use the Strymon destroyer setting is to add just a little bit of vinyl, old vinyl crackling and warping to my ambient loops just to give a little bit more interesting texture. Now, to do this, what I do is you go into the destroyer and you go into the parameters. For this example, I'm going to try to make it as clean as I possibly can. I have the bits and the sample as high as they can go to make sure that we don't have any noise coming in and out. Any extra noise, I should say. The filter is off, and we get to the vinyl control. All right, so in just a second, I'm gonna hit play on the loop, and I'm going to add in the vinyl control, and we will see how it changes the sound of the loop. So, as you can hear, this adds a really nice amount of texture. It just gives that really great old record player sound. Now, the cool thing about this is the speed and the depth knobs are directly tied to the vinyl control. The speed, obviously, is how fast the vinyl spins, and the depth is how much warping is added to the vinyl control. So what I'm going to do again, hit the loop, and then I'm going to add in as much vinyl as I can in the parameters and then play with these two to see how they affect it. So with that example, you can really see how the speed and the depth, but really the depth, add a completely new flair to just adding the vinyl on top of your signal, because it gives it almost this vibrato-like warping, especially with the depth all the way up. So that is the first way that I use the Destroyer, and that is to just add some vinyl effects on top of an already created loop. Now the second way that I use the Destroyer setting on the Mobius is to add a filter to really just change the tonality of a loop. So in the parameters, you've got bits, you've got sample, and you've got filter. And there are actually 8 filters you can choose from. And I'll cycle through all of these individually in just a second with the loop. But they range in type, and they're all based on some sort of a real-world device. So let's go through. I'm going to hit the loop, and I'm just going to go through each one of these and show you what they sound like. You can really see how each one of those has its own characteristic and completely changes the tonality of what you're playing through it as you set it. Now, obviously, just picking a filter and setting it on one could be a great way to change the sound of your loops. But one of the things that I really enjoy doing is alternating between maybe filter 1 or 2 and the off section, because you'll notice when I play the loop here in a second that when I hit it back to off, all of the fullness and the bass enters the signal again. And so it's a really cool way to introduce the sound of something being really far away, or the sound of like an old telephone or something, and then all of a sudden bringing it into the full spectrum of sound. So let's give that a try. So that's one way that I like to add dynamics into a loop while I'm recording it. And some of my micro loop compositions that are on Instagram actually have in the composition, halfway through or 1 or 2 passes through the chord progression, me actually changing the filter to change the tonality and the sound and the fidelity of the recording. So that's one of the things that I like to do. And to take it a step further, I'll have a bank where I have one with a filter and one without, and the two have the exact same settings in the same bank. And so that's a quick way to access a higher filter level. So instead of going from just 1 or 2 to off, going all the way to like 5 and back to off without having to worry about scrolling through the filters and potentially messing up while you're trying to do a loop. So here's an example of that really quickly. You can already hear the differences in the filter. This is without, and this is with. So here we go. So you get the idea with that. Obviously, you have to spend some time getting the timing right so that the transitions between the two sounds are smooth. But that is the second way that I use the destroyer setting with my loops, and that is to add some dynamics by adding a filter or taking a filter on and off throughout the loop. Now, the third way that I'll use this is to mess with the bits and the sample knobs, which I have mapped to these two external parameter knobs right here, to get some really cool, almost Game Boy, like Nintendo sounds. So let's give that a listen really quick. And this effect is really cool. I've got the loop half-timed right now, but if you add in the reverse feature of the loop, it's really cool as well. So let's take a listen to that. As you turn down the sample and the filter and the bits knobs, you get into some really crazy territory. So I'm just going to set them as low as they can go and hit play and show you what it sounds like. So as you can see, there are a lot of possibilities with just tinkering around with the the bits and the sample rate. So that's a cool way if I want to get something that sounds like a dying NES or like an old arcade game or something like that. That's where I'll go, depending on the way that I want to take the loop. But that is the main third way that I go and I use the destroyer when I'm doing any sort of ambient compositions or loops. Now, the fourth and final way is pretty much just a combination of all three of the first ways. And that's where the mix control also comes really in handy. You've seen me using this a little bit already, but obviously all the way to the left or the right is the actual affected signal, and all the way to the left is your dry signal. And normally I start with it in the middle, but I'm just going to hit play and find a combination of all three of these that suits the loop, and you'll get an in-time practical example of how I would use a combination of the first 3 points that we talked about with a loop. So here we go. So there you go. That was kind of a culmination of the first 3 ways that I use it all into one. And like I said, there's so much more that you can do with this pedal. I'm only scratching the surface in the way that I use the Destroyer, but the other effects in this unit are just as tweakable, just as diverse, just as versatile, and they sound just as good. So I would highly recommend, if you have a Mobius, just take a deep dive into the sounds. Try to think of really creative ways that you can take these effects and make them something new. Feel free, if you have any ideas or you found some things in the Destroyer that are super useful and super creative that I didn't touch on in this video, please, please, please leave them in the comments below, and I will for sure check them out. Alright, so that has been the 4 main ways that I use the Strymon Mobius's Destroyer setting in my own playing. Again, if you have any ideas on how to use the Destroyer that I missed, please leave them in the comments below. And if you have any ideas of any videos that you would like to see, especially with any of these Strymon pedals, please also leave them down below, and I'll for sure consider them for a future video. And again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, please make sure that you like, that you subscribe, and that you hit the bell icon, because it helps out these videos a great deal. But I've been Andrew, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my video. Can't wait to see you next time.